Hello everyone, I'm Caitlin Teeter, and on today's Teeter Tales, I'm going to be doing a review of the Mistmantle Chronicles by M.I. McAllister. I'm not going to be going into spoilers for this series. You can see chapters in the description if you want to go to a specific part of the video, so let's go ahead and get into the review. Mistmantle Chronicles is about a young squirrel named Urchin. The first book, Urchin of the Riding Stars, begins when Urchin is approached by Captain Crispin, one of the three captains who serves under the king of the island, and he takes Urchin on as his page. Urchin's very excited until some terrible events occur on the island, and he has to navigate how he can best serve his island and his captain during this time. The other books continue to follow Urchin's story, but I won't get into them too much because that might spoil the first book for you. The writing quality of the Mistmantle Chronicles is nothing spectacular. It's not bad, but it's just kind of average. The writing isn't bad by any means, but again, this isn't something like Redwall where you'll read it and just be invested and enjoy it for the writing itself. Really, it's other parts like the plot and the characters that are going to draw you into this series. I would also point out that there are several typos in each book, I think about 3 per book, that I don't think are McAllister's fault at all. It's things like a character being called by the wrong name, or maybe a word repeats twice, that I think was just the copy editor missed when going through these books. The characters are really the strong point of this series. There are lots of characters, and I found that I could be invested in almost all of them. McAllister does a great job of having a big set of characters, but not ever losing sight of them. A lot of series tend to struggle with having too many characters to know what to do with, but the Mistmantle Chronicles does a great job of balancing out the stories and character arcs for the different characters. McAllister also does a great job of letting her characters grow up, change, and grow old. She tracks some characters who go from kind of being kids to adults by the end of the series, and other characters who kind of grow old by the end, or even characters who just are moving to different life stages throughout the books. And that's something that I think she does very beautifully and in almost a realistic way in the series that a lot of books tend to struggle with, but Mistmantle does very well. I was really surprised to find that my favorite characters were different this time around. I still loved my favorites from when I first read it, but characters like Captain Padra or Juniper the Squirrel stood out to me a lot more this second time through, which I think just speaks to how well done these characters are, that I can read this at different times in my life, and different characters stand out to me and are more meaningful to me the second time around. The villains in this series are fine. They're not as good, I would say, as some other books like Redwall, but they're still very much, they serve the purpose that they have in the story. The first book, Captain Husk, he's a creepy, evil villain, which is kind of all the villains in this series. They're totally evil, so they're not going to have that much moral complexity to them, but they serve the role of being a nemesis for the main characters. A few of the books even don't really have true villains to them, which I think is also an interesting thing that helps make the books stand out from each other. The plots of each of the books are very different from each other. If you had asked me before I reread the series what the plot of each book was, I could probably still tell you that before rereading the series. You have some where you have a plot against the king, and how are you going to prevent that from happening in the first book, whereas you have others where there's disease spreading across the island and a kidnapped princess. And those different plot lines really help the books stand out from each other. It can sometimes feel like it's, oh, what's the new disaster of this book going to be? But it keeps the books interesting and engaging, so I was never bothered by that. The plots are also, again, memorable, and I think they're well thought out. Often, there will be several storylines running through each book, and I think McAllister weaves them together really well. One critique I would give is the pacing. The first 2 books especially can sometimes have a really quick pace. I think the later 3 books have a really good pace, but the first 2 sometimes will skip months at a time in a single chapter, and it can sometimes make me feel like I want to know what that character was doing in that time. So it never gets boring with the pace. It doesn't get too slow, but it can sometimes feel a little fast in the first two books. The world building of the Mistmantle Chronicles is not super complex, but I still enjoy it. There are 4 main types of animals in the series, those being squirrels, otters, hedgehogs, and moles, but there are also various species of birds that will pop up throughout the books. And unlike the Redwall series or some other fantasy series where you have some species that are good and some that are evil, this series actually takes the approach of any particular species can be good or bad, and you will see good squirrels, good moles, bad moles, which I think sets this apart from books like Redwall. I also really appreciated that the animals still feel like animals. Redwall often feels like they're people who just happen to be animals, whereas Mistmantle puts much more of an emphasis on the fact that these are anthropomorphic animal characters. So each of the animals has their own special characteristics. There are things such as moles are known for loyalty, squirrels are known for being valiant and brave, otters are known for being dependable, things such as that. I also really appreciated that you have other distinctions for the animals that are more based in real life, such as squirrels, otters, moles, and hedgehogs all eat their own types of foods, and they all have their own types of homes that they like to live in. And McAllister kind of plays with those tensions throughout the book series, where you'll have some animals thinking that they're superior to others because of their species. And I think that that dynamic is really fun to see play out. The book also has a unique setting because Mistmantle is an island that is surrounded by enchanted mists, which keep most ships from getting through to the island, so it protects the island, but that also means that anyone who leaves the island can no longer return through the mists. And so it is a really unique way to set up this world, and again, helps it stand out from other books with anthropomorphic animal characters. Occasionally, it can feel like parts of the world are being introduced just to serve the plot, such as Book 5 has this moment where they discover this structure they had never known about before that happens to help them out later. But for the most part, I think McAllister does a great job of introducing new parts of the world in a way that it feels natural, because it fills out the history of the world, and often she is really good at saving the payoff for something she set up for several books later. There were lots of moments where she remembered rules or places that she had set up in previous books, and then that came back to play an important role in a later book. So she does a really good job of keeping up with her own world building and not forgetting elements of it. The 2 main content concerns you would have for the Mistmantle Chronicles is probably the violence and the scariness. The violence in this series is actually not that bad. You will have stab wounds described as being bloody and how the character was killed, but it's never very graphic or gory. I think an elementary school reader could totally read these books and be fine with the violence. I think the bigger concern for this series is the creepiness and scariness, especially of some of the villains. There's this one villain in book 2. I'll talk about him in more depth in just a moment, but he has dead animals hanging on his walls, and it's just generally creepy. And there are places that McAllister includes, such as a dark tunnel with a pit that creates a sense of despair and terror in the animals who visit there. That's clearly meant to be a scary area, and McAllister does it well, but it could be too much for younger kids. I'd also point out that there might be some moments that are too much for younger kids to handle, especially books 3 and 5, and just generally later parts in the series. The Mistmantle Chronicles does not shy away from harder topics, and it will have character deaths or really hard situations that happen in the books, and it handles those really well, but those scenes could be intense for some younger kids who might have gotten really invested in the characters and storylines. The one other thing I would talk about is the spirituality of the Mistmantle Chronicles. I actually didn't realize it originally until I hit, I think, book 4, that this is probably a Christian series. The animals pray to and worship the heart, which is the name for God in this series. And they have a priest who will give blessings on the royal family or blessings to animals before they go out on a quest. And while it's not too prevalent throughout the series, it is there. I don't think it's heavy-handed. Again, I didn't even realize this was probably a Christian series until much later into the books. You'll also have characters who have a sort of sixth sense, such as being able to tell when an evil event is about to happen, or characters who pose a threat, such as false prophets, or again, going back to book 2, Smokewreath the Sorcerer. He is an example of the darker spirituality that some of the villains can have. He is described as a sorcerer and says that he uses the body parts of his victims to create magic. However, the book portrays it as he may not actually have magic, but it's just the idea of him being magic that allows him to control others. But I thought I would mention that because he does have a creepy, generally spiritual sense to him as a villain. I would definitely recommend the Mistmantle Chronicles. I love the characters in the book series, so if you're someone who is invested in characters and that's really what keeps you reading a book, I would highly recommend this series. Again, I've read this series twice. I think I went through all 5 books in just a couple weeks the second time. The writing is not complex, which is not a bad thing, but it is pretty simple. It makes for a quick but very enjoyable read. The series also tackles some hard topics and themes, which I really appreciate. It does it very well and delicately, but does it in a way that feels very heartfelt. The first book does have an audiobook, which I enjoyed, but that is the only book in this series to have an audiobook, so you will have to read the physical books for the others in the series. I don't think the series was super popular when it came out, so I think that's why they only have an audiobook for the first book. When I bought these books, actually, it was out of print, and so I ended up having to buy old library copies of some of these books, but I looked online and I do believe that the books are back in print now, so it shouldn't be too hard to find them. Again, while the writing may not match up to books like Redwall, it still is a very enjoyable series that I had a great time going back and reading. Again, if you're someone who loves books with anthropomorphic animals like Redwall and likes that kind of medieval fantasy setting, I would definitely recommend the Mistmantle Chronicles, as it's a much more character-driven type of narrative. I hope this review was helpful for you and that you might consider picking up the Mistmantle Chronicles after this. Bye!